Thank you for joining us for another session of our series to start the Hare Krishna movement again. And a disclaimer is very important at the beginning that I am not against ISKCON. I am for Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON. I'd like to begin with a quote from reading a quote from Srila Prabhupada. This is from Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th canto, 28th chapter, 48th verse from the purport. At the present moment, practically the entire world is afraid of rogues and non-devotees. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is started to save the world from irreligious principles. The main business of human society is to think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead at all times, to become his devotees, to worship the Supreme Lord and bow down before him. The Acharya, the authorized representative of the Supreme Lord, establishes these principles. But when he disappears, things once again become disordered. Perfect disciples of the Acharya try to relieve the situation by sincerely following the instructions of the spiritual master. So, we're almost ready to start talking about the positive aspects of starting the Hare Krishna movement again, but some more education is necessary to understand the problem, because problems can only be solved once they're properly understood. And when people don't understand the problem properly, they deal with the symptoms, and thus the problem cannot be solved. And so I submit to you that practically all of the discussion about the problems of ISKCON are because they are dealing with the symptoms instead of properly understanding the problem. Diviner Demonic, this book is very controversial and many devotees do not understand it. So I'd like to read some appreciations of the book. This one is from Mukunda Swami, not Michael Grant, not the early disciple of Prabhupada, but a devotee who is given sannyas by Kirtananda Swami. Let me start out by praising your commitment, depth of research, and gallantry. Your dedication to Srila Prabhupada's mission and instructions are inspirational. For many years, I watched the ever-deteriorating situation within the institution of ISKCON. I could never quite understand what was going wrong.
I nikad nisam mogao shvatiti što je krivo.
Fall downs, Prabhupada's faithful disciples pushed out, sometimes physically removed, crimes, absolutely zero preaching or follow-up with the non-Indians, book changes, deity worship changes, you know the list very well. Did I ever suspect poisoning or that the entire post-1977 ISKCON was built on lies? No, but I do now. All the pieces have come together to form an undeniable truth, an intentional hijacking and brilliantly planned destruction of our movement from within. So, today we are going to talk about institutions.
Danas ćemo govoriti o institucijama.
The perils of institutions and why Srila Prabhupada did not want his organization to be institutional. The first thing that we have to understand is that all of us, we are completely conditioned and indoctrinated by institutions from childhood. That's the way the present world is organized, by institutions. So from the time we go to school, and then we get our job, and the government, everything that we come in contact with practically is organized as an institution. So institutional organization seems as natural as can be for us. It seems like that's the way you do things. If we're going to organize something, say we have a group and we're going to organize it for some cooperative work, what do? We create an organization and we put some people in charge. And almost always these organizations have a hierarchical control. That is, from the top down, somebody on top making the decisions and everybody else carries them out. Then on top, also besides the head person, there's an elite who becomes separated from the rest of the group. The role of that elite is to make sure that everyone conforms to the dictates of the institution. And almost always, the organizations that we belong to do not serve our interests directly. For example, we don't go to work because that serves our interests. We go to work because it will give us the money that we can use to get the things that we need. So when we're involved with an institution, we are serving our own interests quite indirectly. And because the elite is basically hurting us to reflect the norms or the dictates of the institution, we learn to become outer directed.
I onda naučimo da budemo upravljani, poslušni.
That is, we're not in touch with our own selves, and we're not able to follow what we feel are the proper things that we should be doing. In many cases, we see the institution doing things that we feel are wrong, but we cannot do anything without losing our connection with the institution from which we get various kinds of support. So in this way, we lose contact, we become out of touch with our very selves. Okay, so I would expect that sounds familiar to everybody, right? Every, school, again, school, work, government, practically everything we come in contact with is organized in this way. And of course, when we're talking about government, let's say the conflict between what we feel is right and what the government is doing becomes, in many cases, very great. When the government's doing something that we feel is very wrong, then the only recourse that people have is to go out and march in the street, because the government is acting in their name and doing things that they feel are very wrong. So a great deal of the angst for people in modern society is due to their participation in institutions of various kinds. So now I want to give a definition of institution the way that I am using it here today. So this is the definition of institution that I'm using as I speak today. Any permanent social organization with purposes of its own, having a formalized and structured rules and methods for pursuing those purposes, and making and enforcing rules of conduct in order to control those within it. An institution is an independent, self-justifying, self-perpetuating organization that, for all practical purposes, is not accountable to nor under the control of its members. Yes? No? What? Come on,
No.
respond. Sankarshan, what do you think?
This reminds me of Christianity, like in Vatican. Vatican must exist. So
Okay.
we have the same story here in ISKCON.
Okay, does it remind you of ISKCON also?
Da li te to podsjeća na ISKCON, je li tako?
Tako je, naravno.
Yeah, of course. This reminds me exactly of ISKCON.
Sure. Hey, the significant sentence there is that it's not under the control of its members. They try to tell everybody what to think, and everybody must get in line. Gore, what do you say?
This definition does not remind me on ISKCON. It is the definition of ISKCON.
Ah!
This, I submit, is the root of all the problems of ISKCON. Right? This is the problem. And all the other problems, or the so-called problems that everybody's continually discussing and, carrying on about, they stem from this definition of the GBC's ISKCON. Even further, does this even sound like a spiritual organization? Wouldn't we expect a spiritual organization to be to be organized in a quite a different way?
Mogu da komentiram.
I can comment something.
Yeah.
Ajde.
Mene ovo sve podsjeća
My conclusion is that one of the problems is that there's a great deal of presence of westernized and Christian consciousness within ISKCON. Here in ISKCON, everything is set up according to westernized, way of organization. Like, for example, like Vatican, that is.
Well,
Vatican.
that's exactly the point I'm trying to make here. Institutional organization is the method of the demons. We don't read about institutions in the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Institutions, they place power in a position or a seat, and whoever occupies that seat, they have the power regardless of their qualification. Vedic culture, on the other hand, gives authority to persons of ability. And when the sages assembled at Naimisharanya, they elected the most capable person, Sutta Goswami, to speak. I'm sorry, when Parikshit sat on the bank of the Ganges, it was the most qualified person, Sukadev, who was the speaker, and so on and so on. The institutions that we're talking about, as defined here, these are arrangements by the demons to exert control over as many people as possible. So we have presidents, right, who America, a senile fool who supposedly is running the country and making all the decisions. And in Ukraine, they've got another joker, a comedian, who's destroying the country by his own decision, and nobody can do anything about it. Yeah, the point is, institutions, the way this is defined, these are not from spiritual organizations. These are for demonic, created by the demonic powers, specifically to exert control over as many people as possible. And I want to make it very clear, this is not the way Srila Prabhupada set up and arranged his society to function. Okay, now I want to speak about the problems that are inherent with institutional organizations. And specifically speaking about for a spiritual organization, institutional organization creates problems. Okay, the first one, some people have a title and a position that goes with it, some authority that they can exert over others. Now, in a spiritual organization like Krishna consciousness, we want to become free from our false ego, but title and position simply add additional layers to our false ego. Oh, I'm a president, I'm a regional secretary, I'm a even, sannyasi or guru, because sannyas and gurus are de facto positions within ISKCON. Okay, another one is that devotees will mistake having a position and having a title for spiritual progress. If I climb up the institutional ladder, I'm thinking that I'm making spiritual progress. And particularly that is the situation for neophyte devotees who have no other way to judge. They do equate institutional position with spiritual qualification. The third problem that such a institutional organization creates is that those with position, they begin to act out of false ego with religious conviction. They are now representatives of God, of Krishna, and they are empowered to act for Krishna. And so it's not surprising sometimes to see people doing things that they otherwise would not do. And they justify themselves in doing so because they have such a position. So when you have impure people acting on the basis of this ego extension, it gives rise to a saying or an observation of Blaise Pascal. So Blaise Pascal, he gave this very famous quote that men never do evil so completely and cheerfully as when they do it from religious conviction. Another problem that's inherent in institutional organization is that people in the organization lose their individual initiative. They cannot or do not act unless they are instructed or authorized to do so. They don't even think of acting. That's somebody else's job. And now here's another very big one. There's a confusion between form and between form and substance. Form and substance, two very different things. Let's take example of personalities in Chaitanya Lila. Lord Chaitanya specifically he made those who had no position or no form, he made them the acharyas. So for example, Namacharya, Haridas Thakur, from a Muslim family, but he was made the acharya of the holy name, for which many of the Brahmanas criticized Haridas. And even the result of that was he was beaten with the intention of killing him in 22 marketplaces. It was only after he survived those brutal beatings that the Qazi could understand, oh, I made a big mistake. This is a holy man. This is a very spiritually advanced personality. So Haridas, he had the substance of a pure devotee, of a very advanced acharya, but he did not have the form. Rupa and Sanatan Goswami, two other examples. By their association with the Muslim government, they were rejected by Hindu society, but Lord Chaitanya selected them to become the acharyas in spreading Krishna consciousness. Now, this same form and substance can be understood in terms of any organization. For example, the government. The government is based on laws and a constitution, not on bricks and elected people. The constitution is the substance, and all the people, the elected people and the government buildings, that is the form. So the same thing with ISKCON. What Srila Prabhupada defined ISKCON, and we discussed that earlier, he defined ISKCON in a particular way, and that's the substance. The form is the organization, the GBC, the regional secretaries, and so on. That's the form, not the substance. But neophyte devotees cannot make a distinction. Just like less intelligent people, they cannot make a distinction between the form and the substance of the government. This creates a problem. If one cannot discriminate between the form and the substance, they're very easily misled. And the problem is, most devotees, the vast majority, don't know what the substance of ISKCON is because they've never read those foundational documents. So by not understanding the difference, the neophyte devotees, they're serving the form, but they're not getting the taste. And after a while, their experience becomes mundane. That's what Srila Prabhupada said. If you create bureaucracy, it will become another mundane institution. And then the next point is, who is serving who?
I sljedeća poenta je, tko služi koga?
We come to Krishna consciousness and ISKCON because we feel that it is serving us. We are getting something from that relationship. But there are so many devotees who are submissive and have a very nice service attitude, and they are exploited. And so the institution starts using them instead of serving them. So we come to ISKCON because we inherently feel that it is serving us, that we're getting something from that relationship. But when that relationship no longer serves us, there's no reason for us to stay. And this happens because devotees are even trained. Yes, you give service. You're here to serve the institution, but it's not a one-way street. For all of these reasons, Srila Prabhupada did not want an institutional organization. He wanted every center to be independent. And my main thesis is that the majority of the problems in ISKCON stem from the institutional manner in which the GBC, not Srila Prabhupada, have organized the society. And so many of these problems can be solved wholesale altogether simply by removing the nature of the institutional organization. So therefore, I'm advocating a non-institutional organization the way that Srila Prabhupada intended his society to function. What does that mean? That means no hierarchical control by a GBC body. And it means that the management of any center is under the control of the members. In other words, they can vote in a temple president and vote him out. So let's take a few examples now, finishing up. Let's take a few examples of how changing the nature of the organization from institution to non-institutional can solve problems that are seemingly insolvable. Let's take one example of the female Diksha Guru. If you don't know, this was a concept that was being pushed by the GBC in America, but very, very strongly resisted by the members of the Indian Bureau. The Indian Bureau, the way, Prabhupada set up India to organize in a separate way from the rest of the society. Because it's a cultural problem, they did not want to have for there to be female Diksha Gurus. So why is this a problem? Because everybody in the society is supposed to accept the same thing. Because nobody is their own person. They are, when they have a position like Guru or GBC, they represent the institution. So if there's a female Diksha Guru, they are representing the entire society. But again, this is a cultural problem for India. So how do we solve this problem? Simply by removing the institutional nature of the organization. If we define ISKCON as as a informal institution where people gather because they share the same interest, these problems go away. Because why? Because every person represents only themselves. You're not representing anybody else. You are just who you are, period. That's it. Now, there are plenty of women, ladies, spiritual masters, spiritual leaders in India, which is not a problem for anybody else. So if some ladies in ISKCON decide they want to take the role of Diksha Guru, they don't reflect on anybody else. They can do it, and it's either their problem or their privilege. Now, we have to be clear that when we remove the institutional or type of organization, every person simply represents themselves. There is no organization. There are a group of people who gather together to share their same common interests in glorifying the Supreme Lord Krishna. So if any of you don't understand this point, raise your hand and we can discuss it further. Okay, now we'll go on. Let's look at another huge problem. The child abuse in ISKCON's Gurukulas, which is a problem that has creating unlimited damage to the lives of the devotees and especially to the devotee children. Why is this a problem? Because of the institutional organization. And this problem can be solved immediately by putting the parents in charge of the schools. They'll clear out the perpetrators immediately. They won't tolerate any ridiculous organization that keeps perpetrators in position. Everybody's carrying on and on about the abuse and why the GBC can't fix this problem of child abuse. It's because the GBC are keeping control of the gurukulas. So you remove the institutional organization, you take the schools out of the institutional organization. These problems can, if not immediately be solved, they can be greatly reduced. Now, admittedly, this is a much more complex problem than female Diksha Guru, but I believe the parents, because their own children are there, they can deal with the problems very effectively. See, in institutions, if there's a problem, it's somebody else, some responsible person that has to deal with it. Everybody else, they become powerless and all they can do is complain. We solve the problem by putting the power in the hands of the people who have the greatest interests. Any comments about that, or Gore?
I also wonder how can you comment that in many instances we see that the institution put people with no qualifications to act as the teachers, not just the perpetrators, but even as the teachers. I heard a situation that there were devotees that the authorities didn't know what to do with them, so they put them in charge to act as the teachers. This is just such a crime. Just from this perspective, what to speak about doing child abuse, etc.
This was particularly true in the early days. I'm not familiar with the, of course, there's many gurukulas now, and I'm not at all familiar with how they're organized, but that problem may still be going on. Mother Sachi, what do you have?
Hare Krishna, Maharaj.
I see that the Ganesha Maharaj is putting great emphasis on decentralization of the organization, and he's believing firmly that by decentralization of the institution that many problems could be solved.
Ja, in naprimer, ja, jaz se s tem popolnoma strinjam.
I totally agree with that. Before Prahladananda Maharaj came in our yatra, the GBC was Bir Krishna Maharaj, and he was not involving a lot with management, local things, etc. Those years we had such a big deal of decentralized system. We have free hands, so to say, in many issues.
We had what?
Free hands to how to do things, how to manage things, etc. He was not involving much with that. So I see that this decentralized system helped, but it was not good enough because the problem was still that on the positions we didn't have qualified leaders, like qualified kshatriyas or educated people who are supposed to lead.
Okay, well, that's another problem. Let me respond to that. Now, when I say that we don't have institutional organization, it doesn't mean that we don't have any organization at all. Leaders are required. They should be trained and they should be qualified. It's not that by removing the institutional organization, all the problems are solved. No, there's then some different types of problems that have to be dealt with, but they can be dealt with without somebody blocking it. Okay, Sachi? Also?
Yeah, yes.
So we have to put we have to give a great emphasis on putting qualified people in the positions, and they should be trained and educated.
Okay. We're going to speak next week about non-institutional organization. I'm going to go into that in great detail. Are there some other problems, some other perennial problems that any of you would like to discuss that might be relieved by removing the institutional organization? Baba.
Imam jedno pitanje.
Instead of giving emphasis on the things that bring together all the different branches of sampradaya. Devotees are putting emphasis on what is making difference between us. So we should speak about things that make us together, that we have in common, not only the things that we differ from one another. We should strengthen all these things that put us and binds us together, and then we can continue successfully. I have experienced that some devotees were pointing out the differences between ISKCON and Gaudiya Math and the different spiritual Vaishnava institutions, and also in Udupi. We are also part of Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, but in Udupi they have different, interpretation of Madhva philosophy.
Sure.
So even there,
Okay.
there was
Yeah,
some
so
differences.
this all stems from the consciousness of I and mine. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he greatly criticized this sectarian spirit. Now, beyond that, you remember that I'm practically always saying we must keep in mind the fact that this world is controlled by demonic forces, and they want to destroy religion and religious cooperation. And it's a very common technique that if you want to interfere with your enemy, you infiltrate their group and you create trouble between them. And this could very well be Kali Chelas who dress like devotees for the purpose of creating problems. Srila Prabhupada said there are many envious people in the dress of devotees in this movement who should be completely neglected. And how do we know who those people are? Palena Parichyate. You judge by the result of their actions and their words. So there must always be active leadership who are looking after the devotees, guiding them and protecting them. This is why Kshatriyas carry a sword, because sometimes they have to put people in line or eliminate them.
Ja imam još jedno pitanje.
Maharaj last time said that his desire is that some kind of temple society would be formed where the devotees will live according to the Srila Prabhupada's desire. So I'm curious to know how the Maharaj is thinking, how this organization would be acting, and how the leaders would be trained, what would be the principles of leadership management. What is your idea about it?
That's exactly what we're going to speak about next week.
To je ono o čemu ćemo upravo pričati sljedeći put.
But first we have to deal with why we need that type of organization, and then we can, without any impediment, we can talk about establishing that organization. So we'll see you next week for that. Okay, we're getting on an hour and a half now. So I've finished up my comments for the most part. It's very nice to see that there have been, for the last week's video, there's almost 800 views in 1 week. But I'd like to encourage all of you to leave some comments, particularly leave some comments in your language, because as you know, there's detractors who sometimes they put negative comments. So it's the voice of the people in the comment section. So again, I'm not against ISKCON. What I'm for is Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON. So yeah, again, I'm not against ISKCON. I'm for Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON, so that the intention of his movement can be fulfilled.
Good. Da bi mogao reći.
Baladev Prabhu has something in regard to Sridhar Maharaj, if he can comment how Sridhar Maharaj was commenting some issue. When he came from the Hungarian farm to me, there were some conflicts between devotees here in our yatra, And then Sunandana Prabhu showed him the membership card of ISKCON in Croatia. He took that card, threw it away, far away from him, and said that Srila Prabhupada is very angry in regard to that. And he said that we should clean the things here. I would try to do that, but I must have a strong team, strong members.
Okay, let me comment on that, please. Prabhupada gave several explanations for this. One, he said anyone who is chanting Hare Krishna is a devotee. But in his direction of management, which we read last week, Srila Prabhupada also said that a temple president cannot be removed without the vote of the local devotees. So there must be some type of organization for this. And we'll discuss that in more detail next week, what that can look like. Okay, so remind me next week. If I don't bring that up, please remind me. Let's wind it up with that. So again, thank you very much for your association. This is important for the future of the world. In the first part of Divine or Demoniac book, I write about the Jesus and his followers and how what they were believing and teaching has been completely eliminated from this world by the demonic powers. The same exact thing can be done, and by my opinion, they're attempting to do with Srila Prabhupada's mission. So please do not minimize what we're doing here. This is extremely important for all the future of the world. Again, thank you for your association. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Nishad Maharaj ki.
Jai.
Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hari Bol.
See you next week then. Hare
Vidimo se
Krishna.
sljedeći vikend.
All time.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
A
Krishna.
šta sa ovim videom?
Hare Krishna.
Sa ovim videom?
Što?
Pa na kraju rekao za neki video da ćemo dobiti.
A da, nešto bi trebao pripremiti kao prijevod za video ili kao nasnimiti glas ili tako nešto ono. Ne, za video neki.
A kad ćemo to
dobro.
dobiti?
Pa kad napravimo, nemamo pojma još o tome, ako to pripremimo i tako, dobit ćete svi onda ono.
Akor, kaj je rekao ovoga da ga... Oprosti se.
Da, video treba dobiti.
Ja.
Reci.
Samo, a ima to veze sa ovim svinčnikom tamo što smo dobili
Možda,
neku
da,
zadaću?
ne, ja nisam 100% siguran da li je to ili nešto drugo, ono, ne, ono. Čućemo do sljedećeg puta, koliko tjedna ćemo nešto napraviti, da. Ne znam ja posao. Jer mi smo poslali na grupu te svinčnike, ali nije ništa napravio tome, tako da ne znam da li je to ili nešto drugo. Reci Bada Prabhu.
Htio sam samo pitati ovoga, a kaj je rekla da ga ja podsjetim ovoga na ovo?
Da, za tu poantu, ono, da. Drugi put kad bude govorio o lokalnoj instituciji.
Aha, da opet o Sridhar Maharaju.
Da, samo ga podsjeti na to da je rekao da će za to, zašto nam treba lokalna organizacija.
Ima još i druge stvari, ali jednostavno nije bilo toliko vremena.
Da.
Tema je takva da čovječe...
Hoće ići ranije spavati, ja znam kad je bio kod nas. Ono.
Dobro.
Tako da evo gasim snimanje. Ja sam inače izletio sa Zooma u jednom trenutku, nadam da je sve u redu sa snimkom.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama.